to what's happened in the last few years, where the Tories after Brexit, they betrayed every promise they made to the British people, to ordinary workers, when they said we're going to bring the immigration numbers down and that'll help wage growth, and they did the opposite. They absolutely opened all the doors. So now we've got some 2.5 million people arrived in the UK in just the last 2 years alone, with no price, no premium paid. And so that actually has a cost to the British taxpayer. And it's simply unfair.
Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into some serious questions that have been on the minds of many. Have you noticed how politicians love to make grand promises during election campaigns, especially when it comes to hot topics like immigration? But once they're in power, those promises seem to fade into the background. It's frustrating, isn't it? It feels like there's a huge disconnect between what we're told and what actually happens. This is a sentiment shared by Douglas Murray, a renowned writer and commentator who's been very vocal about the current immigration policies in the UK.
For instance, write a piece about a terrorist who attended a certain mosque, you would never be allowed to, and nor should you say that everyone at that mosque, therefore, is a terrorist. Oh, but if a white working class person is upset about anything, let alone a large number of white working class people, bang, far right, like that. No way to express anger, frustration, or anything else without being deemed to be far right. I think this is a big mistake that the political class and the media in the UK have made.
In a recent interview, Murray pointed out that while the public has been raising valid concerns about the cultural and economic effects of immigration, particularly regarding Muslim immigration, the government continues to tiptoe around these issues. This reluctance to address public concerns head-on has widened the gap between what people expect and what their elected officials actually deliver. So, what's really going on here? Is something about to change in the UK? Let's dive into the details. Public frustration with immigration policies. For years, immigration has been a central concern for millions of people across the UK. Many fear that the sheer scale of migration is having a profound impact on both the culture and economy of the country. However, despite widespread public unease, the government seems hesitant to tackle the issue with the seriousness it demands. Douglas Murray has been particularly outspoken, claiming that the UK government's failure to address the cultural tensions associated with large-scale immigration is a recipe for disaster. It's not just about policy differences anymore. There's a growing sense of betrayal. People are frustrated that their concerns are being sidelined while politicians make empty promises about reducing immigration levels. Polling data backs this up. Recent surveys show that a significant portion of the UK population is deeply dissatisfied with how immigration is being managed. A large majority believes that the current levels of immigration are simply too high and that the government isn't doing enough to control it. This frustration cuts across demographics and political affiliations from young to old, rural to urban.
Stand and protect that flag. Use that pay to do it and do nothing. You're cowards. Every one of you. Cowards. You run away.
Beyond the cultural concerns, immigration also has a noticeable effect on the job market, which many British workers feel directly.
If you've got net migration running at 750,000 a year, it's not surprising the size of the economy grows. But the income per head has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. The penny is beginning to drop. Mass migration is making us poorer. Mass migration means our kids and grandkids can't get houses. Mass migration means rents are up between 20 and 30% in the last 3 years alone in this country. Mass migration means I almost missed this interview. The traffic is now so bad on our roads because 6 million more people live here than when the Conservatives came to power. Now, you can argue economics all you like, but I'll tell you something. This is now the 5th manifesto in a row from the Conservatives that has promised they'll reduce net migration. No one believes them, and Labour have almost nothing to say.
Over the past decade, a significant portion of new jobs has gone to workers from abroad. While immigrant workers have undeniably contributed to the UK economy, their presence has led to increased competition in sectors like construction, agriculture, and hospitality. Douglas Murray has pointed out that although immigrants fill important roles, the overwhelming numbers and lack of proper training for local workers have caused considerable job displacement, particularly in lower-skilled sectors. Many British workers, especially those who rely on jobs that require little formal training, feel the brunt of this competition. It's a bitter pill to swallow, especially when politicians had previously promised that immigration would not harm the job prospects of British workers. Political inaction and the betrayal of voters. One of the most significant issues Murray addresses is the growing mistrust between the public and political leaders. This isn't just a disagreement over policy, it's a deepening divide. For years, voters have been promised that immigration would be brought under control, yet year after year, the numbers continue to rise. People feel betrayed. This frustration has led to a decline in trust in the democratic process itself, with more and more voters feeling like their concerns are falling on deaf ears. Murray argues that this disconnect is not just dangerous, it's a warning sign. If politicians continue to ignore the voices of their constituents, the entire democratic system could face a crisis of legitimacy. It's not just conservative voters who are upset either. Traditionally, left-wing groups like trade unions used to be vocal critics of unchecked immigration, arguing that it would lead to wage suppression and job losses for native workers. But in recent years, many on the left have become more hesitant to raise these issues, perhaps fearing they'll be accused of aligning with the far right. This shift has only deepened the divide, particularly for working-class voters who feel abandoned by the political establishment.
Now, if I take you back to the 1980s and the 1990s, yes, I'm old enough to remember, we had real growth, GDP growth, of 2.5% to 3.5% per year. Yes, if it was less than 2%, people would get worried. If it was less than 1%, people thought it was a moral recession. Now the Chancellor gets excited at 0.5%. But here's the real point. We didn't have mass immigration in those 2 decades. And I'll give you the example of the 1990s. Real wage growth for British workers was about 2.8% every year. We're amongst friends. Let's call that 30% over a decade. But in the decade leading up to the Brexit referendum in 2016, there was zero real wage growth.
So, what does this all mean for the future of the UK? Murray warns that we're on the brink of something significant. The disconnect between the public and the government can only widen so much before something gives. Whether it's through electoral change or mass protests, the public's growing frustration is reaching a boiling point. This dissatisfaction is particularly dangerous because it undermines the democratic system. When people lose faith in the ability of their elected officials to represent them, they may either withdraw from the political process altogether or turn to more extreme alternatives. Douglas Murray's message is clear. The UK is at a crossroads. Either politicians begin to address the real concerns of the people they serve, or the country could see a dramatic shift in its political landscape. Where do you stand on these issues? Do you agree with Douglas Murray's assessment, or do you think the government is on the right track? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more updates and in-depth analysis on stories that matter.